Welcome to what I think is the 75th webinar in the Herman Miller Insight series online, which started in March last year. We've had over 11,500 attendees. For any new attendees, Herman Miller is a company that designs and manufactures furniture and accessories for environments where people work, learn, heal, and live. And we've got a strong heritage of research, which informs our product development, but also helps customers create great places. But in addition to our own research, we look to inspiration from others. And that brings us to today's speakers, Shimrit Janes and Paul Miller of the Digital Workplace Group. Shimrit is Director of Knowledge and Paul is CEO and founder. And they're going to be sharing insights based on their wonderful new book, Nature of Work. Probably one of the most beautifully produced business books I've ever seen. And 10 lucky people who are on today's call are going to win a copy of the book. I'm really looking forward to this session. Shimrit and Paul, over to you. If whoever isn't speaking could mute themselves whilst the other one's speaking, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. Over to the first speaker, and thank you for joining us, everyone. As we go along, and I remind you to use the chat box for questions, which we will pick up at the end. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Lovely to be here. I'm going to leave the doors to my garden office open because apparently people like the bird song and it doesn't talk about nature of work. So great to be doing this with you, Shim.
It is. I'm so excited to do this. And you're right about the bird song. I had the windows open this morning at about 4:30 and I could hear the birds even though I'm in a suburb in North London. So there's something beautifully drawing and pulling about bird songs. I'm glad you've left it on for us.
Yeah, so just to kind of set the context, Shim, what's your kind of view now of why we wrote this book?
What's my view of why we wrote it? It's needed. I think there's something in the zeitgeist, there's something in the air that is pulling people towards the feeling that the way in which we work, and this is even before COVID, isn't working. And our relationship with Earth and nature isn't working, and our relationship with our organizations isn't working. And I think you and I both felt that deeply in the conversations we had in the lead up to deciding to write this book, and feel it even more strongly now. And so nature of work, for us, the reason we wrote this is we need that new story of what work can be, and a more positive, hopeful story, which we hope we've put the language around within this. What about for you? Has your kind of feelings about it changed at all over the last year, the last couple of months?
I think just the central message which we're communicating today, which is that the idea that organizations are machines is a story that goes back to the start of the industrial age in the late 1700s and has had its day, and now we need a new story for work. And actually organizations are living systems. You're alive, I'm alive, and the organizations that we're in are themselves alive and should be seen not through a mechanical lens, but through a living lens. And that reconception of an organization as being alive really reframes and reorientates and relanguages things. So we kind of stuck in a little slide just to kind of be a little bit clever when we started here, didn't we?
Clever, but also something that apparently terrified Mark when we were going through the run through.
Okay. So don't worry. Yeah, this one isn't saying there's a tech problem, but it really comes out of this idea that everybody's saying, like, well, you know, when will we go back to normal? When will we return to work? As if there was a point in the past, and it struck me that thinking about that, it's a bit like we want to press factory reset, turn the machine on and off, and then return to a factory settings. But we're not machines, and you can't do that. And in fact, you know, if you take an organization we've been talking to recently, the IMF or Procter and Gamble, in the case of Procter and Gamble, with hundreds of thousands of people, each one of whom has been affected, changed by the pandemic, as well as the organization changed by the pandemic. So the idea that you can return to normal as if there was a place in the past called normal, and that we all sort of collectively agree on, and go back there is a mechanistic way. And this idea that actually what we're trying to do is regenerate, reimagine, reemerge.
Yeah,
Anyway.
absolutely. There's something about the idea of return to the office, for example, the idea that you can return to a point in time that existed before the pandemic it's not how time works. You might be returning to a physical location, but each of us as we go into that space is different to who we were a year ago. The space itself will have changed through design, through how we feel in it. The interactions that we can have will have changed. So it may be a return to a physical place and geography that is the same, but actually we're stepping into something new as we move forward. So that was the idea behind this screen, just to get us out of the idea of a reset into regeneration.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing that we really want you to take away from today, it's the knowledge and almost the reassurance that your organization is alive. It's a living, breathing ecosystem that's comprised of and thrives on rich biodiversity and the relationships between everyone and everything within it, and that are connected to it, and that we can use this language of nature to really capture that idea. And each organization that exists has always been this ecosystem. It's not new, as Paul was saying, even though we're used to using mechanistic language. It is a superorganism that is as alive and as vibrant as a forest is. It has its life cycles, it has migrations, it has adaptive structures, it has habitats, it has intelligence. All of those things exist within the community of people and things and places that is an organization. And yet, as Paul was saying, for years and for decades, we've collectively believed a story that treats us all as though we're machines within work, and that tells us that our organizations likewise are like machines, are more like factories. So why are we talking about your organization existing as though it were a forest rather than a factory, and about it being an organism rather than a machine? And that's because the stories that we tell, and also the stories that we internalize, matter. They help us understand what has been in the past. They help us make sense of what's happening today. And they also help us imagine what could be in the future, whether that's through sci-fi, what we hear politicians talking about, the stories that we consume through film. All of these things help us imagine what the future could be. And they really tell us about the nature of power, and they tell us about the nature of change, and they show us the art of the possible, which is particularly important through times of disruption and uncertainty, like we've just been through and are going through now. And some of the stories that we've inherited about work from our families, from our different cultures, from our political leaders, communities, some of those have served us really well. They've led to growth, they've led to all the various innovations that we benefit from today. But at the same time, a lot of those stories haven't served us well. And we can see that in the lack of inclusivity. We can see that in failing working patterns. We can see it in toxic cultures. And also our broken understanding of nature and human as being separate. So we all now really have an opportunity to decide what stories of work we want to be living by, and also what stories we want the next and future generations to inherit from us about what work is. And it's really because the last year has been hard. There is so much individual and collective grief that I think we're all processing. And as we emerge out of this pandemic, both individually and collectively, we really have agency and we have power to decide and really act upon what comes next for us all and which path we want to be taking into the future. And we face so many challenges on so many levels, whether that's globally, nationally, locally, within an organization, within a community. Our teams are facing challenges, our families, individually as well. One of the biggest ones that many are currently grappling with, as we all know, is this idea of the return to the office and understanding what hybrid working really means and how that's going to work. And there are so many anxieties attached to each of those challenges. And at their heart, they're really existential. They're asking of us, who are we? Where do we belong? What's our purpose? And who do we want to be? But in the face of all those challenges, we also have hope. And this is something we've spoken about again and again, the idea of courage and hope and boldness. We've really seen a revolution in empathy and desire for participation and healing. And we've seen how quickly and innovatively we can all move and collaborate. And we've seen how we and also the planet can regenerate if given the space to do so. And it's really that hope that our book Nature of Work is based on, that we can all have the courage to be bold and unapologetic about how we can build this new positive story of what work can be. So when many people talk about emerging into that new story of work, they often talk about the digital age. They talk about technology, they talk about AI, they talk about robots and automation and productivity and efficiency. And technology is important. It's obviously a mass enabler to all of the things that we can do. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to get through the last year. But we believe we can do better than defining this next phase of the digital age. We think rather than making technology the main character, we can make life the main character to this next age of work. And as we face down our challenges, this can really be a living age, and that we can heal and put at the heart of our work our relationships with each other, with the communities that we impact and rely upon, and nature itself. And this is why we turn to nature for the language and frameworks in our book, Nature of Work. We can really be inspired by nature, which has been doing this and regenerating at micro and macro levels for over billions of years. So that's why we talk about the idea of your organization is alive. But what does that mean in reality, and what can you do about it? So Paul, these are our Nature of Work elements. And do you want to introduce them, and we can then talk through the ones that we're going to be talking through?
Yeah, and that's absolutely, and it's a great phrase that you just used there. Rather than technology as the main character, life as the main character. And I think there's been a sense in the world of work and kind of more broadly, that the idea that technology is an enabler, which it is, but also this idea of disconnecting from technology. But nobody's saying I want to disconnect from life. Actually, we want a deeper, a closer relationship in our own lives and in our work. And what we've done in the book is have 12 elements, chapters in the book, and we start with purpose. Roots, habitat, biodiversity, relationships, structures, life cycles, migrations, threats, regeneration, intelligence, and then we end with health. And the purpose and health, if you like, are the kind of bookmarks of the element of the elements. And we believe you need to start with this idea of purpose inside work, and the broad topic which we close with is this idea of overall health. We're all used to the idea of financial health in organizations, but we know that true health in any organization ticks various boxes, of which one is financial health. So if you're American Express, and can I just check, Mark, is my sound coming across okay?
Perfectly fine.
Okay. Yeah, so the health, if you're looking at American Express, one of their health indicators is their ability to attract the best talent in the world. So that's an indicator of health for them as an organization. So those are the 12 elements, and we're going to just draw on some of them as we go through this. So if we look at the first of the elements, which is purpose, each of the definitions in the book, and as you can see, these are all grabs from the certain pages in the book. It looks like a coffee table book about nature. It's actually a business book about work, and we have two definitions. So how can you find the deeper purpose of your work and your organization? And the work definition is why your organization exists. And I remember meeting the CEO of a large consulting company, and he said, we're incredibly successful commercially as an organization, but we don't know what our purpose is. And we live in a world where those two things can kind of coexist but aren't satisfactory. And really it's about looking and finding what deeper purpose is. So an example which we talk about in the book is the well-established organic food company Riverford. They deliver fruit, vegetables in the UK, increasing range of local grown. They've got a high degree of employee ownership in the company, 74%, owned by an employee ownership trust. They're committed to a model of sustainability across the whole organization. And if you listen to people inside Riverford, including the guys who deliver the food, talk about Riverford, there's this sense of purpose. So for example, one of the things I like to do is walk in nature, is one of the inspirations for the book. And if I'm standing beside a tree and I ask myself, so what is the purpose of this tree? Well, clearly its purpose is not simply to suck carbon monoxide out and produce carbon dioxide. It's not even to produce beauty and experience for me as a human being walking past it, but there is a sense of purpose there. And we all feel that in nature. It's hard to put your finger on, and actually each organization, I think Herman Miller's a great example of an organization that has a thread and a depth of purpose in its people, in its conversations, in its history. You know, when we were talking to the IMF last week, they were founded like a lot of global institutions after the Second World War, and in 1947, and there was a sense of, there was a purpose there. And now in this new 21st century world where environment rather than just financial stability plays such a role, there's another question. So what could be the deeper interconnected purpose of your organization so that it can fulfill its own needs? And a lot of the pandemic has revealed deeper purpose in organizations, the rise of empathy, as Shim mentioned. The next element, which is one close to Herman Miller hearts, I know, is the topic of habitat. And when we're talking about places of work, physical, digital, natural places of work, we use this idea of thinking about your natural habitat. So, you know, if you look at nature, it doesn't have places, it has habitats. You know, there are animals that migrate, there's this kind of cycle and seasonality. And work is, when we're looking at the definition of habitat in work, is the physical and digital places where work thrives. So it's really trying to think about that. There's one of the companies that we talk about in the book is Vitso, which is a furniture design company. And they've taken a widescreen approach to relationships. They've got a highly innovative new headquarters in Leamington Spa. The building was deliberately designed to support relationships, open internal spaces so that people can serendipitously bump into each other. I mean, we've got our first team day tomorrow for 20 people based in the UK. We're all incredibly excited. I'm incredibly excited. You excited?
I am. The idea that we're actually going to be in the same physical space and habitat after sharing just digital habitats for the last year is really something, and I think helps with our relationships as well and to reconnect. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, and so really it's trying to sort of think, well, if you're Procter & Gamble, if you're Verizon, if you're Herman Miller, what's the right habitat for each person and each team on any given day, and where might that be? And I think the beauty of finding ourselves in our optimum natural habitats is we know that will bring out the best in us. Now, that does need physical space, and it needs all of the furnishings and equipment that brings. But it's that way of thinking about it. The next element that we wanted to just pick out today is roots. What are the unseen foundations and systems that underpin your organization? So if I'm in that forest where I mentioned the tree and I look across the forest, the roots of the forest are invisible to me, but the health of that forest is deeply informed by the health of the roots, the connections, the tentacles, the intelligence, the knowledge, some of which we understand and some of which really we don't understand, that is in the hidden systems, structures that underpin that system. And if you think of your organization, what are the parts of your organization that are invisible, but that directly inform the health of the whole system? So, for example, your culture, your ability to innovate, your infrastructure, the technology, all of these things that really inform the organization. One fascinating example we have in the book is Procter & Gamble. The company's been going for nearly 180 years, and it has a serious level of archive activity to make sure that the roots of the organization are kept alive as part of their organizational culture. And all new North American employees take a tour through the archive center, and they've been doing that digitally when they haven't been able to do that physically. But I would say, probably talking to them, the thing they're most concerned about in the sort of enforced fragmentation of work that's happened in the last 15 months is, what effect is this happening on our culture, our roots, and the things that make us the company that we are? So do people in your organization behave as isolated trees? And we all know about silos and isolation, or do they behave more like a forest? You know, you don't get one tree, one section of the forest trying to sort of hide itself off and split off and garner resources just for itself, because it knows not only over time will it suffer, but the whole system will suffer. And that's the kind of organization that we all need to try and foster now. The next element I'm going to pass back to you for, Shim, because we all have our favourite elements, don't we?
We do. There are some that you'll possibly draw more to, and then I love all of them, but I obviously have my favorites, and you do as well. Biodiversity is one of my favorites. I think we know that in nature, biodiversity is critical to the health of an ecosystem. We know that the more diversity there is, the more resilient that ecosystem is, and the more adaptive it is to change. And we've really seen over the last couple of years what a decline in biodiversity means to the health of an ecosystem. And as in nature, so in our organizations, we've seen that diversity can really be a critical health, it should be and is a critical health indicator for an organization. And homogeneity can be easier sometimes because it means everyone agrees with each other, but actually it can lead to echo chambers. It can lead to a lack of innovation, a lack of creativity. And actually the more diverse voices, the more diverse experiences, the more diverse expertise that exists within an organization, the healthier it can be, as long as that is managed in a healthy way where there is trust and there are good relationships. We've seen over the last year, for example, or the last couple of years even, the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, the impact of the Me Too movement on conversations, and just really what does it mean to belong to an organization and to belong to a community and really feel like you can bring your full self to work. So drawing inspiration from nature and using this language and the concept of biodiversity helps elevate this from the risk of it being a checkbox activity to something that's actually an integral part of knowing that an organization is healthy. And that can be, diversity means of things. It means the different backgrounds of people within an organization, but also the cognitive diversity. Do you have people that think differently, or does everybody think the same? And it's the diversity of the locations that exist. So one example that we have that works really nicely is from Oxfam International, and they were able to harness different technologies such as Yammer and things within their digital workplace to connect the diversity of their organization globally to help knowledge flow, much as the tree and the root system, as Paul was just talking about. They were able to harness that root system, their culture, the technologies, to make sure that all the diverse people and all the different people in their organization were actually able to share knowledge, get answers, and have knowledge flow around the organization. And it's a key part of how they're able to operate. So biodiversity and thinking of it through that lens can be really beneficial. The next one that we have is life cycles. So Paul, do you want to talk through this one?
Yeah, this is another of my favorites. I think the reason why I like some of these elements more than others is my age. So I know stuff like purpose, roots, life cycle, regeneration. But this one is how do organizations evolve over time? And again, I think Herman Miller's a great example of a company evolving, thinking, challenging itself over time. The work definition here is the phases of life in an organization as it evolves over time. I love this story that we've got in the book about Nokia. It's a fascinating company. It started as a Finnish paper mill in 1865. And after the First World War, it nearly went bankrupt before becoming involved in the telecom sector, eventually undergoing a remarkable transformation, as many people know, to emerge as a pioneer in mobile telecoms. Dramatic ups and downs over the 20 years after that. The Nokia journey is one that has evolved over many life cycles, and I think it really shows that cycle and process of adaptability. So as we emerge out of the pandemic, for example, I'm the CEO of the Digital Workplace Group. We've got about 120 people in the company. One of the things that I think is there for us in terms of life cycle as we merge out from pandemic into endemic is thinking about true health of our people and relationships across ourselves as a company, and trying to cater for the different requirements. You know, what would it be like if we have what's called DWG Quiet Week every 8 weeks, where we just turn down the meetings, the chatter, and we still work but quietly, and it's a chance just to kind of rebuild, regenerate, and people really love that. So ask yourself, where are you in your own life cycle? How does this impact your work, and how well supported are you? Everybody's been through a sort of rites of passage journey through the pandemic, and been changed by it, and your organization has been changed. Are there different parts of your organization at different stages in the life cycle, and which stages, and how well recognized is this, and how much is it spoken about?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a conversation that we were having with one of our members last year, where a project they had spent so much time on had come to what felt like an unnatural end for them. And there was a lot of grief associated with that. If you pour your heart and soul into something, you want to see it through to its end. And as we were speaking to that member, we were able to use the language of life cycles, the language of regeneration, to really mark that moment as a passing of something that they were hoping to see through and to bring to life, and to help them go through almost a mourning process for their team. So this idea of life cycles can be really powerful within an organization to help have those conversations and really see where any part of your organization is, as well as the organization itself. Shall I do this one?
Yeah.
Perfect. One of the things that we talk about is that nature consists of relationships. Everything within nature is in relationship with something else, whether that is animals in a social structure, such as within a social grouping of gorillas, It may be the relationship between prey and predator. It might be the relationship between different trees in a forest, between the sun and plants, between a creature and its habitat. A relationship exists there. Everything is connected, and I think we are of nature, and the last year has really shown us how important connection and relationships are to us, and how technology has helped us maintain some of those relationships, but also how much we've missed just being in person with the people that we care about, whether that's colleagues or family or friends. And organizations thrive on relationships. They're made of networks of people and things and places, like we said, all of which have a relationship with each other. And while they are often healthy and nourishing, relationships can also be toxic and unhealthy. And I think looking at the lens of an organization through this idea of relationships, whether that's internal relationships, the relationships between the leaders and the employees, or even with the outside world, it can really help you start to understand how healthy the organization is in terms of kinds of behaviors that you're seeing through its relationships. Paul and I'm going to sneak peek now. Paul and I are just starting a podcast related on the book, and our first episode is with Cook, an organisation based in the UK that do frozen foods and frozen meals. And what really came through strongly in that conversation was how important relationships are to them as a main driver to everything that they do. And it's almost their starting point to all the work that they do. And having relationships of trust, of connection, trying to understand how you can gather different relationships together in different structures and gatherings, really go to the heart of how work is done. And so as we move forward into this next phase of whatever work is going to be, and people think about hybrid working, are we in the office, are we at home, are we in the library, are we in a factory and retail, I think having this lens of relationships and how the different habitats help support them is going to be crucial as well. Well, I know this is a favorite of yours, Regeneration.
Great. Yes. So the next element is regeneration. So renewal at many levels is at the heart of organizations that remain successful over time. The difference between life cycle is, I think that's more about different stages, if you like. They're more distinctive, whereas regeneration is that ability to refresh, restore, innovate across many dimensions. And we can see that, if you look at an organization like BMW, they've been looking back over the last 116 years of their story. They're also looking forward through the eyes of some of the youngest people inside the organization for the next 116 years. One of the examples that is really good that we've talked about is Lego. In 2003, the company was in trouble with sales down, high levels of debt. It's been called the greatest turnaround in corporate history. We all know that they've done this by kind of generating engagement across, first of all, girls rather than just boys, adults rather than children, reducing the amount of actual Lego, which is interesting, simplification, and through all their incredible movies, which everybody loves, and these stories of regeneration. And I think, again, it feels so current in 2021 to be thinking about the topic of regeneration rather than rebooting or returning, which I think are more mechanical terms, whereas regeneration, re-emerging, reawakening. Even the Financial Times has talked about their September festival as the reawakening. I don't think 12 months, certainly not 24 months ago, they wouldn't have touched a word like reawakening. But now it's their it's the kind of master banner for their September festival. So ask yourself, are the seeds of regeneration already within your organization? These could be through areas such as experimentation, innovation, feedback loops. And what does your organization do to play a role in supporting the regeneration of environments outside of itself, such as within society. Brewdog, Scottish craft brewer, doing fantastic things. They bought 2,000 acres in the Scottish Highlands, 3/4 of which will become woodland, supporting 1 million trees. And what we're seeing are these, they're not even small organizations, people like Mindful Chef, Cook, they're significantly sized organizations that have got built into their way of operating this deeper connection into their mission. So I'll hand back to you, Shim, for intelligence.
Thank you. We start this element with the story about aliens. This idea that we, over time, have, as a species, have looked to the skies and kind of wondered what's out there in terms of an alien intelligence and an intelligence higher than our own, and is that something that we can learn from? Is it something that we need to be afraid of? And in a sense, the way that we've looked to the skies and had that consideration is how we look to technology at the moment, with a mixture of awe and fear. Whereas actually we have a way of thinking about intelligence that is quite human-centered. We kind of judge other things by our own intelligence, as opposed to, for example, really understanding the depth and breadth of intelligence that exists within the natural world in all its different forms, whether that is the ability to use tools across so many different species, such as the octopus and ravens and all the rest, or just the intelligence that seems to exist within ecosystems in and of themselves as a way of being able to rebalance and just to keep going and keep regenerating. And I think for organizations, this idea of a collective intelligence, a deeper intelligence, an intelligence in all its different forms and guises, is something that we can really learn from. It can help us be more inclusive across the organization instead of having a hierarchy of what we consider to be intelligence. I used to work in facilities, and even though they were the heartbeat and the kind of engine room of the organization, to use mechanistic language, or the roots in a way, they weren't always respected. I don't know if others within facilities and real estate sometimes feel that, but actually they had so much knowledge about the organization that if you were to bring in this more inclusive idea of intelligence within the organization, the opportunity to really harness that by connecting different people is huge. It's why cross-functional teams are seen as so important. And again, it's that diversity idea. And then if we start to layer in technology on top of that, it can help really augment what we know. It can help us see patterns that we may not be able to see. It helps us be more ethical around our use of technology and design of it if we start from a point of nature rather than a point of technology as well. So there are really questions here, such as, are some forms of intelligence held to be more sacred or elevated above others in the organization, and what's the impact of that? Are you missing out on ideas and knowledge and innovation by having that gap? And how does your organization really consider ethics in relation to intelligence? And is that something that you can renew and rethink about in terms of how you're using technology, how you're designing it, how you're designing spaces? And can you start to use technology to harness that intelligence, that collective intelligence? We know that, for example, AstraZeneca was developing its 2025 strategy with input from its employees, and it had a 3-week crowdsourcing initiative that involved as many as 64,000 employees as it could. And it was able to use technology to harness that, but it was really down to relationships and biodiversity and inclusivity. And the campaign was so successful. They had 11,000 contributions. They had 23,000 ideas contributed, and it had a major influence on their strategy. So that's crowdsourcing the collective intelligence and the collective consciousness, really, that exists within a community. And I think is going to be crucial as we move forward around some of the complex challenges that we're all facing.
Yeah.
Paul, do you want to finish us off? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say on the intelligence topic. I mean, it's so interesting. So we have no problem thinking that human beings have intelligence or and consciousness, that we're conscious. but organizations also have intelligence and consciousness. And if they didn't, how would we see debates like we've experienced this week within one of our clients around culture? You know, what effect has the pandemic had on our culture? Now, nobody can actually pull out the culture, show you the culture, and give you examples of the culture, but there's this collective sense that there is a culture and it's got certain characteristics, and that comes out of this shared intelligence. I mean, for instance, my car doesn't have intelligence. A machine doesn't have intelligence, but a living system does. So the last element that we'll cover is health. And as I said, a bit like purpose at the beginning, it's the sort of holistic, it's the Uber element that covers everything. So what are the health indicators in your organization, and what do they reveal? And the work definition is that many living factors, the many living factors that contribute to the longevity of an organization. And an example would be New Zealand, obviously a kind of star in the COVID firmament, but it announced its first well-being budget in 2019, and it had 5 health well-being indicators, and that was defined as when people in the country are able to lead fulfilling lives with purpose, balance and meaning to them. And I think if you think of your own organization in terms of its health, so I mentioned American Express, so one of the health indicators for them is their ability to attract and retain the most innovative, high quality people. You know, I was talking to somebody at Pixar, and their ability to work in creative community is an indicator of health. So there are multiple different indicators, all of which are important, and your organization will have specific ones. But when you start to see yourself as being alive, just like you would as a human being, you think about your own physical health, you think about your mental health, you try and track those. If you're like me, a little bit obsessively, but it's the flip side of a hypochondria, I always think. But you know, which health indicators do you and people in your organization seem to currently prioritize? And what would a focus on more holistic organizational indicators mean for your people? So for instance, you know, the rise of leaders being more empathetic is not a brief COVID kind of experience. It's something that will endure, because I think once you've had empathetic leadership, you can't go back to a more disinterested, detached and dispassionate leadership. You have to stay with that. So we've covered some of the elements, and I think, Shim, we're now going to hand back to you, Mark, and see how all this has landed.
Superb. Thank you very much. That was outstanding. I love the book. It is beautiful, and as I say, 10 lucky winners will get one. But we've got some questions for you. One is, since COVID-19, the remote workplace and workspace, physical and digital, has an ecosystem challenging wellness. How can organizations be much more supportive for their people?
It's a really good question. And one of the things that I was reading about a couple of weeks ago was the idea that as organizations are focused on wellness, they've done things like introduced meditation apps and the idea of your well-being toolkit and helping on all that side of things. But actually what the Financial Times study that was getting into that found was no amount of meditation apps are going to help you feel okay in yourself if your workload is too high. And if your team isn't supportive and if your manager isn't supportive. So that idea of overload within the physical and digital workplace within your habitat it needs to be down to the relationships, and it needs to be down to managers, and it needs to be down to having that conversation as a team and one-on-one as well, so that it's really understanding the impact of work on people so they're not burning out. And that requires trust. It requires a safe space to be able to have those conversations and to really understand the impact that the last year has had on people. There's also the idea of overload, the idea of Zoom fatigue. I think some of the tools that we're using digitally have been fantastic at a transactional level, but haven't really gotten to the heart of how it feels to be within those spaces. So within video conferencing, for example, the fact that you can see yourself creates a cognitive dissonance and creates a lot of overload for the individual. So understanding the kind of very human, natural behavioral impacts of some of these habitats that we've created and are spending time in can go a long way as well to really impacting in a more positive way the well-being of people. So having the conversation around meditation apps, the conversation around well-being, the conversation about mental health to start to remove stigma is so important to create an environment that feels welcoming, but it won't get to the heart of people's well-being without those other conversations as well, about workload, about overload. It needs to cover both is the answer I would have. Paul, I don't know if there's anything you'd add to that.
By the way, Paul, I just want to let you know I am muting you when Shim is speaking because there seems to be some kind of echo problem when Shim's talking. That's why I'm muting you. Bertie, do you have any other questions that you've seen come up?
Yes, I've got one from Justin here, and he asks, are the health indicators related to the purpose of the organization?
Are the health indicators related to the purpose of the organization? Well, if you take the Cook example that Shimrit mentioned, they would say that relationships are fundamental to the purpose of that organization. Relationships between their employees, with their customers, with their communities. So I think it will depend on the organization. I would probably say if you're an organization like Nokia, you'd probably look at the life cycle side of it. I think it can depend. I mean, I think, for instance, Shim and I have an interesting debate about Amazon, the company Amazon. You know, it's a controversial company, and you might think at no level is it a nature of work living system. But actually, if you look at what they're able to do in terms of intelligence, if you look at what they're able to do in terms of regeneration, you see a lot of strength. And so their purpose appears to be linked into that. Interestingly enough, I think probably what they lack as an organization is a deeper sense of purpose. And actually, I think their in a way, their capacity and their value could increase through that.
Great, thank you. Right, so quite a long question here. We can see these principles being implemented in organizations through a change management program, which is usually more effective with as much face-to-face engagements between the management and the people. Although with the recent rollout of the vaccines, organizations are still mostly working remotely or implementing hybrid working. How do you manage the efficacy of driving these principles throughout all levels of the organization when there is that lack of physical connection?
It's a great question. And I think one of the things that we've seen through the Digital Workplace Group is when we've spoken to members who are global, who already have hybrid workforces in a sense, because they have people in factories, they have frontline workers, that question of how can you instigate change if you're not physically face to face with someone is always challenging. And I think, again, it comes down to the impact of relationships, the impact of using the technology to really harness stories as well. So when we look to the digital workplace as a shared habitat, what stories are being told through that? Are you seeing a variety of voices? The people who are going to influence individuals often are peers and people that they trust. So are you helping people connect in that way to be able to create relationships where they trust and they feel safe with other people using the digital workplace? So that might be through an enterprise social network, it might be through virtual town halls, it might be by having leaders visible in those spaces and accessible, and having stories told not just by HQ, but by people who are all around the organization in different locations, and having local stories. And I think harnessing communication, harnessing connection through those shared virtual tools, if it's done in a way that is empathetic, can lead to change. We've seen it in DWG. We don't have offices. We're able to change things. And doing it bit by bit, having your pockets of people, having your personas, having your little groups of people who work in different ways can help there. Nothing will replace face-to-face. It is different, but you can create meaningful relationships through that digital workplace as well. It just needs to be done very thoughtfully and to not get distracted by the technology. You need to put in the effort to really communicate well. Paul, do you have something to add to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, and it's sort of ironic. The digital workplace group specializes in the digital workplace, but the thing that we've been most aware of in the last 15 months has been the inadequacies of the digital workplace. I think we all crave physical connection, and as organizations, we should all aspire to make sure we connect physically, thoughtfully, using, being mindful of ecology, and use it as much as we can. And I think it's important, even if you can't achieve that, to say that's where we want to get to as an organisation, because it's quite different to say we're never going to meet again physically, to we can't yet meet again physically, but we really want to. What I would say is that when you're not able to, these topics of listening, authenticity, giving people flexibility, balance. We do something in DWG called Coffee Roulette. I had one with somebody based in Poland earlier today, and we just chatted about our lives over the last year and what's been going on. And those things do make a difference, and they do build connection. But it's also, this is going to be a big challenge for work generally. And we're not going to get all of this right at the moment. I think 2021 is a year of experimentation, really.
Paul and Shimrit, our time is up. We've got to give people at least 5 minutes before their next meeting, because there are important things that we all have to do in between meetings. So Shim and Paul, this has been really, really fascinating. Thank you very much. I'm hoping to be able to share the talk on YouTube when I get the okay from these guys, and you can then share it with your colleagues. It has been fantastic. Shimrit and Paul, thank you very much. Do stay, and if you can open the chat box, this is your applause. Your applause comes via a chat box now. All the thank yous are there. Guys, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll leave the meeting open for a little while for you to enjoy your thank yous. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Mark, and to everybody.